Hello again. I just want to take a few minutes to talk to you about the value of grafting and how you don't have to become an expert at grafting. You don't need to be very good at using a grafting knife, for instance, which can take some time, because when we're grafting, what we're doing is we're taking a variety of something. So in this case, an apple. We're taking a piece from this apple tree or an apple tree, which makes apples are really nice, and we're putting it onto the rootstock of a different tree. And if you go to a garden centre, you're buying a particular kind of apple on a particular size of rootstock. But if you're able to do some grafting, then actually you can do experiments that don't cost you anything. And this is what we've been doing here. So this is a hedge that we put up as a windbreak to the west, southwest of our land, to protect the actual fruit trees that we're growing, the varieties fruit trees here, plums and the pears and the apples and so on. And these trees were actually already here and planted around the place, and these were in a slightly different place, and we moved them 5 years ago when they were a little bit smaller than this. Moving trees of any size is always a bit risky, but they were already there, we wanted to move them, and so this was actually a nice easy way of starting to fill in this space here and make a hedge. And these are trees that presumably were grown from seed at some point, because if you take the seed out of an apple, what you're going to get if you plant that seed and it grows into a tree is you're not going to get an apple tree that will give you the same kind of apple. It will give you an apple which is the cross between the apple that it's come off, but also the apple that the pollen came from, the pollinizing apple. So an insect goes to one apple tree, takes pollen, brings it to the other tree. And so these presumably were grown from apples that somebody liked, but of course they all come out fairly random. So this particular tree here produces apples like this, and actually they smell pretty nice. I would say almost probably something golden delicious-y or something. I guess you can see that in the apple itself, but it's quite a small apple. And what we did was we took some material from another apple tree which we really liked. In fact, it was my partner Jules's sister who had an old apple tree in her back garden which was a nice eating and cooking apple, and she was moving house and she couldn't take the tree with her, so we took some what are called scions. We took cuttings, if you like, from that tree, and what you need is you need to be taking fairly vigorous cuttings, because if they're too thin they're just not going to take. So I've got a piece of wood here which I've just pruned off another crab tree down there, just by way of a demonstration. So you'll be looking at something that's probably at least a pencil thick, and you'll see in a moment why that's particularly important, because we can use a tool. So rather than having to get really good at using a knife, and these are sharp, they have a single-sided blade which enables you to make a straight cut. And it's important that you can make a straight cut, because you're then going to join those two straight cuts together to graft. And what you're wanting is for the cambium, the part that has the sap that travels up the tree, they need to match on both sides. And ideally, we're going to match them so that there's the same width. You don't always have to do this, but you always have to make sure the sap can travel from one to the other. And this is a timing thing. This is done in the spring as the tree is waking up, because when you take something and you attach it to another tree, it needs to be fed, it needs to have sap. And so this process, when you get good at grafting, you can have quite a high success rate. But for the likes of me, I've only tinkered with it. I've never learnt it properly. But we've had 40–50% success from the grafts we made in the hedge here, and they're all a bonus, essentially. So we've got a windbreak, and it's already producing apples, different trees producing different apples, and we thought it would be nice, firstly, to preserve the tree, because we didn't know the variety of the tree that Jules' sister had, but also so we could have some of the apples ourselves. And initially we just needed somewhere to put it, and so we grafted the scion of that tree onto this tree here, and hopefully you can see there is the apple. That's a pretty big apple. If we compare the two, they're very different, aren't they? And in fact, if you look at the leaves, you can see the leaves are also very different. So the scion, the piece of the tree, was grafted on back here. And what we did, so obviously we labelled it so we know what it is. It's telling us already. And what we did this year actually is to take part of this scion, or part of the tree here, which we know to be that variety, and grafted onto a different tree in the front garden. Again, thankfully that has taken, and we're hoping ultimately to turn that into what we're calling Kipling's tree. But yeah, we'll see. So the way it works is that rather than having to play around and learn to be able to do it properly with a knife, and these are cheap tools, you know, £5–10 you can buy a grafting knife, but also you can cut yourself quite badly with it if you're not careful. So what we do is we take our variety, so this has come off your parent tree, the one that you're wanting to keep. You always want to make sure you know which way the buds are pointing, where is the bottom and the top. And what I'd be doing is comparing this to the part of the tree I want to graft it onto. So we'll be looking at somewhere, and as I say, this wants to be at least a pencil thickness really for it to have a good chance of success, and certainly if you're using a grafting tool like this. So the grafting tool will cost you £40 or so to buy. I think that's what we paid for this one. And what it does is it makes a cut, it just makes one cut, but you can change the blades for the shape of the cut. The idea is that what we're wanting to do, if we just cut that straight across and try and join them together, there's hardly any tissue for it to actually form, for it to bond together. And so what this does is it makes a nice shape, this kind of shape, where you can choose the shape because you've got different cutting things that you can swap out. And the idea is that it's a little bit like a jigsaw, that you get two pieces. So what I want to do with this is to find a point between buds. We don't want to put it where the buds are. And I'm just going to put that on there as centrally as I can, and then use that to cut through there. And then what that gives me is two pieces, both with the shapes that join together. So you use the same tool to cut both on the tree that you're joining to, and also the piece that's going to be joined. And then, as you can see, these join very nicely together, as long as what you want to do is to make sure that you're cutting centrally enough that you've got a piece on either side that it can slot into. And you'll see when you put them together that they fit it'll fit one way better than the other. And so what I would tend to do is to try and match these up. So having got my scion, so this is the piece I've cut with like that, and then on here I will be cutting so it's so then the idea is that having cut that one there at the equivalent width, I'm then just putting the two together. And then what I would use is some grafting tape, because you want to tape it up to make sure that doesn't move, because if it moves it's just going to break any tissue joining. And also we'll also use an elastic band which I cut in half and tie off, wind around just to hold it tight. But there's a lot of detail on the internet about how to do this in detail, and that's not what this video is about. It's just to demonstrate that you can take a piece of one tree that you like and you can graft it as long as it's within the family. So this is apple onto apple. You can graft it onto another tree. Initially this was just a temporary way of keeping this. We've got another tree over there where the graft is much more upright, and the idea is that ultimately we will turn that into a Kipling's tree and cut the rest of the tree away, and that seems to be going pretty well. So yeah, you can take the apples you like. So if you don't have room for lots of full-size trees, you can still graft the varieties you like onto, as long as you've got something like an existing crab tree in a hedge, then you can do that as well.